Day 2 of the February 99 7-day retreat in Springwater. Before starting, let me say a few words how questions or comments that are brought up in meetings are worked with here, dealt with. I do not remember verbatim what somebody says, so I cannot reproduce the question exactly how it was asked. Also, it always happens that several people ask very similar questions, so what comes out here is sort of a convergence of many different questions. If it doesn't sound like the one you asked, please don't conclude from it that you were not listened to. Someone said, I'm a little bit at a loss of what this place is all about, what its foundation is. I've been to many different spiritual centers, Zen and other traditions, different sects of Zen, different schools of Zen. And I sort of get the feeling that in essence all of these different traditions point to the same thing or arrive at the same thing. And yet I don't quite know what is the foundation here. What is the practice? What are you doing? That person didn't say that, but that's sort of, what are you doing? What am I doing here? What am I supposed to do here? And can we immediately start asking at the outset, why do we need to know what the particular tradition is of a place that is like this, holding retreats, talks, meetings, sittings? To wonder about this need of the brain to categorize. And when it can successfully categorize, it feels for some reason more at ease. Not that one knows much more through a label, a name, a description. But the satisfaction gleaned from knowing what this is, what the name is, what the tradition is. I'm not putting that down. It is a tendency of the brain, of the human brain, whether it manifests here or there. And amazing to watch it, how with some explanation or label momentarily, the brain is satisfied, it's at ease. Its discontent or insecurity is momentarily, very momentarily lifted. But it's still a legitimate question to say, do you have a practice here and what is it? We don't have one. Which doesn't mean that people can't bring here and do and practice what they would like to. That's up to each one of us. But officially, if we can speak this way, nothing is assigned. I'm not a teacher who assigns work or practices and tests and checks the progress. came from that tradition. And if one steps into this room, even into the house, the care, the orderliness, the cleanliness may remind of Zen tradition. It just happens that people who work here are quite orderly and have a sense of beauty, cleanliness. And of course, stepping into this room, this hall, the square shape of it, the mats along the periphery and in the center, immediately reminds of a Zen center. Round cushions, square cushions, not on the mats, but one can bring them in and then they stay on the mats. Or a chair. That's a little bit off the tradition. So this is what many of us learned and found functional. We're open to suggestions. So originally, many of us trained in a Zen center. And one cannot assume just because one builds a new place, drops the name Zen, one has shed all that goes with it. It took us a long time to become aware of all that we were carrying on. Also the potential authority structure. That takes awareness and moment-to-moment living and openness to people drawing your attention to something. I still remember one time, after many years of having these mats here and the cushion, we put the round cushion and the square cushion on each mat, the way it was at the Zen Center, so it's right here, and somebody said, a person coming here for the first time, do you realize that you imply with this that this is the preferred way of sitting? Of course, the chairs were outside and the mats were inside. He was right. So we proceeded to empty the mats of the cushions and let people bring in what they feel most comfortable with, rather than this subtle. We weren't trying to suggest it, but it was suggesting itself, and we didn't notice it. Didn't think about it until somebody drew our attention to it. But we find that sitting down, retreating, if you will, here or on a bench near the pond, or outside on the front lawn, sitting down and being with what's there is sufficient. It's hard enough. Some people despair of it. Will I ever be with this moment? To get in touch with what's there and become aware how we don't like what's there and want something else to be here, or ourselves be someplace else. The almost constant conflict, subtle or not so subtle, with what is manifesting right now. May it be tiredness or pain in the knees. Several people mentioning a bloated stomach, gurgling. Discomfort coming from that. It's a different diet. One may not be used to so much soy or whatever, all peas and so forth. So to be with what's there, it is an incredible challenge and the supreme art of living, to really, truly be here with what's there. Not as a separate observer or judge or acquiescer, not as any position. Just allow what's there, the hum of the airplane, the breathing, the warmth and light of the place, the discomfort in the stomach if it's there, tension in the muscles, worrisome thoughts with their physical accompaniment, to let that show itself manifest without being hemmed in by judgment, dislike, this ever-present desire to be rid of it or to hold on to it, to become aware of those movements in themselves. The movement to clutch, the movement to reject, the movement to resist, which is the movement of meanness, is to a large extent a movement of resistance or clutching to what is there, and to discover that ever freshly. Like a new sunny day, the sun rising and shedding its gold all over the snow and trees and limbs of branches. The little stubbles of grass and weeds are all bathed in gold when that sun rises. I don't mean to romantically suggest that discovering discomfort is like shedding gold. No, but the awaring is the gold, is the light. Not what it sees, that's this or that, it's always something. Sometimes nothing. Is that, because that's what the person was interested in, and I don't think our 10 minutes was enough to really get to the bottom of it. Please, whoever has these questions that we didn't get to the bottom of, come back. We'll look at it again. Take it up freshly, from scratch. So the person was interested. What is this the essence of all religions, of all religious pursuits? What you're doing here, although it wasn't clear what we were doing here. I don't know whether it's the essence of Christianity or Islam, or whatever tradition one may be engaged in, to just be with this moment in an undivided, indivisible manner. I don't know. And I'm not so concerned, actually not at all concerned, with comparative religion or spirituality. Because a lot of things can be said and written and proclaimed, and it remains on the intellectual or theoretical level. Is the essence of all religious pursuits to climb out of the theoretical or theological level into what's really here? The presence, the factuality, the truth of it. See, the words aren't the real thing. Maybe it is, maybe it is not. It's for each one to find out. If we want to find out, then we have to go to these different places and listen carefully. And can one listen without becoming indoctrinated? A very interesting question. Indoctrinated meaning beginning to repeat theory, theology, ideology, rather than asking, what does this really mean? And if necessary, struggling with it. Because the mind doesn't want to let go. It wants that security we referred to in the beginning, the security of knowing, naming, describing and explaining. There it rests at ease momentarily. It feels unsettling to say, look, what does this refer to actually, and leave that safety seat of knowing for plunging, if you will, into not knowing, which means touching what's happening right now, even though it doesn't seem to be very fantastic, doesn't seem to be enlightening, because one has ideas of what enlightenment is. And that's what one wants. An end station which has solved all problems for all times. So, is it possible to come off of the expectations with which we have been indoctrinated? Getting enlightenment, getting liberated, and touching, listening to, looking at the nitty-gritty moment-to-moment happening in a human being like you and me. Watching thoughts arise, thoughts about me and mine. I'm not saying it pejoratively, just factually. Watching these thoughts arise, the story that webs and winds around it, the body ensnared by it, entangled in it, emotionally, painfully, or lustfully, or joyfully, beholding it all spaciously. So there's also room for the airplane humming and the warmth seeping through the windows and the breathing. Talking about breathing, it is a very fundamental practice for a lot of traditions, mostly that originated in the East. I'm not aware of Western spiritual traditions focusing on the breathing. It's more there on ideas or thoughts, but I'm not well versed in it. The breathing, it's a marvelous thing to listen to or watch. Some people visualize it, experience it, that all of the senses there with the breathing. In and out and in, up and down, whichever way the body is experienced. But must we make a quote-unquote practice out of it? As soon as a practice becomes involved, then with that there is a reinforcement of the thought of me, the practitioner or the practicer, who has to do this right, who has to improve, show progress in order to get to a goal. Do you see that? At the moment I have a practice, there's the I who has it and who does it. And that subtly or not so subtly reinforces this whole structure, which, as I see it, needs to be exposed, not strengthened. Exposing the practicer, the meditator. What is that? Or is there just listening and sounding and bubbling and gurgling and aching and paining and desiring and fearing? Watched closely, listened to intimately, attentively, non-separatingly. This is my old terrible fear. I wish I was rid of it, but rather, what is it? And the inquiry, not becoming the inquirer, but inquiring. Now, I want to say right away, several people use the word practice, and in the beginning, years and years ago, I would look at that word and maybe correct it, or I don't know what all I did. Today, if I listen carefully how people use the word, and if they just refer to this thing that which we, for lack of a different word call the work of this moment. It doesn't matter what word you use. One needs to, in communicating, use words to refer to something that's actually happening. But when there is this openness, this interested or curious, wondering openness to what's actually here, then it doesn't matter what reveals itself. Breathing is always there. It'll always reveal itself. I don't have to practice it. At the moment of opening, here it is. This amazing movement involving not only the total organism, but the whole universe. We're not breathing in a vacuum, in an isolated vacuum. We're breathing the air that has gone through incredible cycles and recycles and input and output. Trees and atmosphere and oxygen and stars and sun. What is not involved in it? And we wouldn't live without it for longer than, I don't know what the medical consensus is, how many minutes. And we'd be finished for this particular physical existence. But the beauty is you don't have to make an effort out of it. A moment of coming to, waking up out of fantasy with all of its physical manifestations, pleasant ones, unpleasant ones. Waking up for a moment. The breathing is there. It doesn't have to be practiced. It needs to be listened to or allowed to be heard, felt, seen in open space with the fan kicking in. Fan kicking in and breathing are not separate in this beholding it all without a vantage point. And that's the difficulty. And one will experience this in silent meditation, the difficulty of listening and looking and attending without taking a position. My knowledge, my judgments, my comparisons, and this constant checking in, am I doing all right? Where am I going with this? Will I ever get it? Can one begin to discern those questions as tapes playing, habitual, well-oiled tapes playing? We don't often see it as that, but the thought, am I doing all right, immediately brings a reflection. No, I'm not. I've had all these thoughts, and my gosh, I've been coming here for years and years and years. Will this ever end? Am I a hopeless case? And then another voice says, yes, you probably are. All this dialoguing, monologuing, until there is a coming to that this is just habitual, learned, conditioned stuff of no particular importance or significance. It doesn't tell us anything about what we are this moment, how we're doing. I don't know how I'm doing. I'm just doing. It takes a different mode of brain activity to become reflective of what I'm doing. And then one is sort of out of being in touch. It is a self-centered mode, not said judgmentally, but factually, reflecting upon oneself and it has a way of sucking the organism and mind into it. Because it doesn't remain with a reflection, a judgment, almost simultaneous, and depression or elation momentarily. These moods all change, like the weather. So, be wary of these tapes playing. Am I doing all right? And maybe realizing or just experimenting with not knowing how I'm doing. I don't need to know it. We don't know that. We know and think we know that we need to know how we're doing. But that's erroneous. Because if you take a test and you want to pass the bar or a medical exam or school, you have to sort of know how you're doing. But they have to repeat or hand more papers in or work harder. But here in this quiet sitting, it's a marvelous relief to realize that we don't have to know how we're doing. So much energy is freed to just be here. That's the essence of being here, freeing energy from all of these futile pursuits of judging, comparing, rivaling, competing. But these movements have to be noticed. If they're not noticed, they run surreptitiously, automatically. They need to be noticed. And it's an amazing thing how much we don't notice, even though we think we notice a lot. Things are so taken for granted, so close to us, so habitual. That's where relationship could come in helpfully. Somebody pointing out to us what we're doing in terms of habitual defenses or you name it. But it's not an easy thing because somebody drawing attention to my defensiveness may elicit defensiveness. I don't want to hear anything critical about myself. So if we really want to get in touch with all the obstacles that bind the energies, then listen to what people say without protection. And above all, become sensitive to wonder about. If something feels the slightest bit upsetting or unrailing or out of balance, stop and look and listen. What's going on? Not what did they do to me, but what's happening here. Usually our usual response is what they are doing, their unfairness, their jealousy, their envy. But what's happening here? It's rich, a rich soil to discover and to question. Not to take for granted, not to protect, and release these protective energies for looking and listening and being here. Because with defensiveness, protectiveness, arises the simultaneous question, what is it that we are defending and protecting? To really go into that, it is worth the energy and time, worth the temporary unsettledness or fear that arises, because we don't even realize most of the time, many of us here have realized it, how attached we are to images of ourselves, ideas, pictures, story, witness the attachment. And to realize as long as there's this attachment to how I look to others or how I want them to see me or treat me, as long as there's this strong attachment, I can't look. I can't even look at defensiveness, because of course I have to defend this. Because what would I be without the image? What would I be without my long, guarded, cherished story of my life? And whether that story is positive or negative or a mixture of both doesn't really matter. We're attached to it because it gives us some sense, strange sense of security. So, see, we're coming from one thing to another and always a new question. What am I without the story? Not I should get rid of it, but an innocent question. I see the attachment to the story, the defense of it, the difficulty in our relationships because I defend my story and you defend yours, and we don't see it. But now I glimpse it. I glimpse it all. And with that glimpse, there is freedom to ask, what am I without all of that stuff? Is there anything left? When there's no story, no image, no me network, me with all my remembrances and anticipations and what I know about myself and what I want to become in the future or be tomorrow. And all the emotions and physicality of it. These are not just abstract networks, they are totally linked with the functioning of this body through its glands, its muscles, its organs, its neurochemical, electrochemical processes, all linked together in image making and image protecting and image hurting. Because we may find out for ourselves that when somebody has quote unquote offended me or criticized me, it's the image that smarts. Like a deflated balloon, hurts. And processes start into action to build it up again. Unless there is a new kind of watching which discovers all of this and gets wise to it. Doesn't get fooled by it. Not all the time. So we've gone from one thing to another, and could we say summarily, this is what we're doing here? What was just unfolding itself in this talk. Call it what you will, it doesn't matter. But is one interested in this, or would one rather be in a formal setting and have whatever the formal setting provides, discipline and practices, graded practices, which give some kind of feeling of progress? I've absolved 200 koans, I only have 100 more to go. But then the other school, they have 500. And how much wiser and more enlightened might I become if I do these extra 200 also? That's how the mind operates. And to become aware of it, which doesn't mean one doesn't try koan study. If it can only detach itself from our human foibles of competitiveness and ambition, achievement, and approbation by the teacher, etc. If it can purify itself of that, a lot of koans are marvelous, marvelous dialogues or statements coming out of this mind which is undivided, whole. one just popped into mind. Two Zen people walking side by side. They're always walking through fields. They must have had lots of space in those olden times. They're never walking through cities. They're walking through fields and woods along a creek or crossing a creek. And one asking the other, who is it that walks alone without any companion? Who is it that walks alone without any companion? And the other says, I will tell you after you have swallowed up all the waters of the Yellow River in one gulp. And one may imagine what all floats down the Yellow River, particularly nowadays. At that time it was just enough, all the waters, the whole splattering and sputtering along. The volume of it, the movement of it, the foam and bubbles of it. Swallowed up in one gulp. And in one version, the first person says, it's already happened, already all swallowed up. And the second person says, then I don't have to tell you. Who walks alone without any companion? That doesn't mean becoming a monk. What are our daily companions? All the image, all the ideas, all the networking. Maybe I shouldn't have told this, because now the mind will say, oh, I wish I could swallow all spring water in one gulp. And if I could only do that, because they did it then I would be freed of all my companions. These conversations, they are out of the moment, in the moment, for the moment. That's their beauty. And can one hear them this way and not carry them around? Actually, this swallowing up of all the waters means nothing more and nothing less than simply being here. This moment of no time. We will end here for today.